Hello everybody. This is the first moment of the whole conference for all of us here. So it's very nice to be together with this audience. Unfortunately, because we have some delay in beginning this session, we have to go very fast. I think we all have a quarter of an hour each as speakers. So I will have to really rush forward because there are many things I want to say on this topic. I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to the organizing of this wonderful conference. I hope we can get together during the breaks, etc., in order to share ideas even more deeply. Now, I was very happy to see when the first letter of announcement, let's say, was sent to us, the fact that the conference both made fascism and its derivatives a major topic of the entire conference, and also talked about, and I was very happy to see this myself personally, that about the irrational aspects of political and ideological discourse in the recent period. Because I had been working on fascism to a certain extent at the international level. I'm not talking about what's happening in Turkey. This is the international scene that I'm talking about. And I was very much struck again by the fact that, as in classical fascism, this time as well, you have all these irrationalisms that abound in the discourse of these new fascists. What kind of fascists I will be saying in a moment. Now, the structure of my argument, is in 5 sections. The first section, I will deal with what we call at our journal, Revolutionary Marxism, with our comrades, proto-fascism. And I will explain what this is in a moment, because fascism is obviously resurgent, and so we have to dwell on the nature of this fascism, and proto-fascism, I think, is the best definition one can give. The second section will be on the basis, the major ground of the irrationalism of today's fascism. Actually, both classical fascism, and when I say classical fascism, of course I mean Hitler and Mussolini and the derivatives, but also today's proto-fascism. Thirdly, I think there are different aspects presented to the different strata and classes of society by fascism with respect to irrationality. There is an aspect which one can call irrationality for the people, the masses of people, the working class, the peasantry, the traditional petty bourgeoisie. And there is an irrationality for the intellectual and the educated classes, which is a bit like already prepared, but we'll come back to this. And finally, I will be talking about the irrationality of the left. And as I say in parentheses, this is self-inflicted, this is no imposition of the fascist movement itself. So I will be very critical and self-critical regarding the orientation of the left in the recent period. Well, fascism resurgent. We have been at our journal talking about this new wave of fascism all the way from the beginning of the 21st century, even going back to a certain extent, because Jean-Marie Le Pen and Jörg Haider were really rising in the 1980s and 1990s, as you know. But we dwelled on this with renewed vigor after the so-called global financial crisis, which was not financial in any way exclusively, which really triggered what I would like to call the Third Great Depression. And in the next session, after this one, Ahmet Tonak from the United States, he's now stationed in the United States, and myself, we will be presenting a paper on this Third Great Depression, trying to explain it and its significance for our age. I would like to talk about the new clothes of the present-day fascist movement. I would like to say that this is a tie and suit or black tie kind of fascism, and it does not have. This is the distinguishing trait of present-day fascism when compared to historical fascism, classical fascism. It does not have paramilitary stormtroopers. There are, all around the world, and especially in Europe, some armed and violent fascist groups, smaller ones than the parliamentary ones, but they do not organically link to the parliamentary parties. So this is not a fascism that presents itself as a violent paramilitary movement which really cows and puts down and suppresses the workers' movement or the left. Finally, proto-fascism, I would like to say, is not something outside or before fascism. It is, I think, fascism in its process of becoming. It belongs to the domain of fascism, in my opinion, and not anywhere else. Now, with respect to the basic ground of the irrationalism of fascism, I think this derives from the fact that fascism finds itself in an impossible situation, given the world situation and everything, all the problems that have to be solved within world capitalism for the bourgeoisies of the respective countries. Here, the turning points in the case of classical fascism is 1929, and in the case of the present fascist movement, 2008, that is to say, the onset of the Third Great Depression. The reason is this. These two dates imply that the capitalist class, internationally speaking, is no longer able to, and cannot even pretend to, solve the crisis of capitalism, this very deep crisis that we call depression, Great Depression, cannot solve this crisis, and so everything really is finished except for a new kind of movement that comes forward in the name of, this time, only national bourgeoisies. Fascism is really the retrenchment into the national domain for salvation, because the international effort for salvation for capitalism has proved to be impossible. So, retreating into the national domain, fascism displays this stark egoism. In the case of Trump, this is, America first. In the case of the Italians, it's the Italiani prima gli Italiani, etc., etc. So, this is really the basis of the movement. However, this happens in a world where the productive forces have become even more internationalized than any moment in the history of capitalism and its highest stage, imperialism. So there is a contradiction here that is really insoluble. On the one hand, you have a national solution, but on the other hand, the solution has to be international. It's not only out of choice that you look for an international solution. It's because the productive forces are international that you have to go for an international solution. So it's the squaring of the circle that brings about this irrational rationality. There is a rationality behind fascism because the problem cannot be solved at the international level. That's the rationality. The irrationality is that it cannot be solved at the national level either because of the other aspect of the couplet, productive forces and production relations. So the only way forward is war and, at the limit, ultimately, the colonization of the entire world by a single nation, a la Hitler, remember. So this is the basis of the irrationality. The irrationality for the people takes many, many different forms. Conspiratorial and satanic fabrications like QAnon, the Great Replacement, the mass killings in US schools, for instance, purported to be fabricated and, you know, not taking place, etc., etc. All kinds of lies abound. The rise of nativist religion. I use the word nativist, belonging to that culture in that sense, because there is another aspect which I will come back to. Islamic fundamentalism is not the only, this is for at least the Turks and other countries with a Muslim majority here, is not the only form of radicalism or whatever you call it. Hindutva nationalism is as rabid as Islamic fundamentalism. Religious Zionism, as we all know, in the case of Ben Gvir and all the other figures in the Israeli government now, is again as radical and violent. And evangelical churches in America, this time really, all you know, from all that I can gather, the major support for Trump comes from evangelical communities. There is this suspicious attitude towards science, for instance, the anti-vaccination movement, which really takes place in all countries, and you know, this is now bringing back infantile disorders such as the measles, etc., and you know, many of these diseases which were once thought to be really outside of the domain of humanity are now moving back in. And then there's the entire garbage, you know, on personal energy. I like your energy and your personal quantum, and you know, you can do it if you persevere without any objective conditions necessary for doing things that people want to do. The irrationality for the intellectual and the educated, well, there the ground is already prepared. I'm afraid I will have to say a lot of bad things about postmodernism here, because postmodernism is an attack on science. That, I think, is indisputable. So that's one aspect. Secondly, the rise of Oriental religion within the intellectual left, all around the world. All these, you know, gurus, for instance, the Maharishi, Mahesh, Yogi, or Osho, these charlatans, really, I mean, in the case of Osho, for instance, have become so popular. And that, inside the modern petty bourgeoisie, a very well-off class stratum, let me add. They travel the whole world, they used to travel the whole world to see Osho wherever he was found, etc., etc. The infatuation with race, ethnic origin, and national identity, which has been around for the last 30 years, or 40 years even, really, and this, of course, you know, fitting in together with the rejection of class allegiance as an important factor, this also fits in with the rise of fascism because they are after race. We'll come back to a very interesting, here it is, yes. Identity politics is now a fashion on the right. Have you noticed this irony? Because many groups of the European right, that is to say the far right, the fascists, call themselves the identité groups. Génération d'identité in France, in Germany or Austria there's a similar group, etc., etc. So this is really very ironic, I would like to say. Now, I would like to come back for a moment in history to the book The Destruction of Reason by György Lukács, the world-famous Marxist philosopher from Hungary. He studies the roots of the irrationalism of the fascist movement in European thought. And he comes across several figures which are really key. There are others. You know, I'm not going to go into all of them because I have a point here. Nietzsche is one. The title of the Nietzsche chapter is Nietzsche as the founder of the irrationalism of the imperialist period. And his concept of the Superman, etc., all these things playing into the hands of fascism. Heidegger is another one, because Heidegger's philosophy, parasitic subjectivism, and Carl Schmitt, to top it all, is what he calls fascist sociology. These are, mind you, all philosophers who are at the center of attention of postmodernism. Nietzsche is really, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many forerunners of postmodernism, the major figure in the history of philosophy that has inspired postmodernism. Now let's look at the irrationality of the left in this light. Now the populism syndrome is, I think, the worst of this, because there is an incredible irresponsibility in sticking to the concept of, or label of populist when everything is so clear nowadays, and this is done not only by liberals, which was of course the real source of the concept populism, but also by leftists. There was a strange case of Donald Trump. Do I have 5 minutes? Yeah. There's a strange case of Donald Trump. You know, I personally, saying this modestly, from day one said this man is a fascist out of the ordinary because the US does not have a fascist tradition, so he's really going for the same kind of thing as Marine Le Pen and as Meloni, as the AfD in Germany, etc., etc. Now, whenever I had an encounter with an Anglo-Saxon intellectual, left-wing intellectual, of course, I never stick with the others, and whenever I had these encounters, they were always very dismissive. Always very dismissive. To the last moment, the 5th of January 2021, no one, but no one, excepting some people in the United States, of course, yes, true, but in the rest of the left-wing movement in the Anglo-Saxon world, no one really considered Trump to be anything but, a schmuck, so to speak, in the American term, with the American term. So, 6th of January 2021 was really the awakening day. I haven't seen, probably there may be people in the audience who will suggest that there have been self-criticisms on this one. I haven't seen anyone yet. This was so widespread. So, one has to really leave all this behind. Call a spade a spade. Après un chat. This is fascism. If it may be, it may of course be, proto-fascism. Now, is Mussolini populist or fascist? Giorgia Meloni comes from the Movimento Sociale Italiano, the Italian social movement, which became later the Alleanza Nazionale, the National Alliance, which later gave birth to Fratelli d'Italia, which is her party. So this is the origin of Giorgia Meloni. There may be evolutions where she changes and moves away from fascism. This has to be proved, as we have to prove that despite all the change, these are fascists. But you cannot simply looking at Giorgia Meloni saying she's a populist. No, without arguments. No, you cannot do that. This is irresponsible. And she is not considered by many as a proto-fascist, but a populist. Now, from Mussolini to Jean-Marie Le Pen, there's a geographic distance, but that's all. Ideologically speaking, Jean-Marie Le Pen owned up Mussolini. I'm coming to it. Mussolini from the very first moment. Look at the logo of the MSI, the Movimento Sociale Italiano, that I was talking about a moment ago. Mussolini, the party that came from Mussolini's fascist party after the war. The only difference, as you can see, is that the MSI logo has the colors of the Italian flag, the tricolor of the Italian flag, and the French one, the FN one, the Front National, Jean-Marie Le Pen's party's logo, the French tricolor. And this is Jean-Marie Le Pen in 1985. He's not really trying to hide this, his allegiance to Mussolini. Look at the size of the logo. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have to recognize this movement, we have to analyze it, and we have to see the reasons for its irrationality, how it forms a real danger for the future of the world, how that movement also, that's not the only one, is also preparing a third world war, and we have to fight it with the methods that are appropriate in fighting fascism, not populism or any other, movement that's within the parliamentary spectrum. Thank you for your attention.